Once or twice a week, I do one of my favorite things in the world. I leave my house, meet a friend or bring my computer, walk to the local coffee shop, order a coffee, and just relax for a couple of hours at the coffee shop. And I enjoy it so much because to me, coffee means community, relaxation, and just stopping during the day. It's something that adds a lot of value to my life, and this entire experience usually only costs me about $5. Well, since I live in Colorado, most of the time I have a craft beer after, so $10. In the personal finance community, people often bash this idea of spending money on coffee, saying that it's a waste of money, as if us coffee drinkers don't know how to spend our money. And people say this because of the idea of compound interest. And compound interest is getting interest on the principal, but also getting interest on the interest. So for example, if I invested $1 in the market, getting an average return of 10% a year, in 1 year that dollar would be worth $1.10. The next year, I wouldn't just get interest on that original dollar, but on that 10 cents. So in 2 years, it would be worth $1.21. Albert Einstein called compound interest the seventh wonder of the world. So if you skip the latte and put that $5 in the market, by the time you retire, that $5 will be worth a lot more. And I don't deny that, and I believe in investing. I invest 60% of my income. But I have two main problems with this argument. Number one is that budgeting isn't about depriving yourself of anything. Now I spend about $50 a month on coffee. And to me, that's money well spent because I enjoy the experience of hanging out at a coffee shop. And if I took that out of my budget, I would be depriving myself. And the second problem I see with this argument is that you're thinking too small. So let's talk about budgeting. In your budget, you have things called big expenses and little expenses. And big expenses are the things that take up the bulk of your budget. And these are things like rent, car, and monthly payments. And your little expenses are things that take up a small portion of your budget. And this is stuff like eating out, buying things, and even the occasional cup of coffee. So let's look at my budget. So I save 60% of my income, but my biggest expense is rent. After that, utilities, and after that, groceries. And you see all these small expenses? These are my little expenses, and these are fractions compared to the bigger ones. So drinks or coffee, for example, is 1.3% of my budget. So if I remove that from my budget, it wouldn't really affect the budget at all. You're thinking too small if you think that coffee is a good thing to cut out of your budget. Now, I don't think that you should be buying a cup of coffee every single day because one, coffee is really easy to make. And two, if you do that, then the little expense is going to turn into a big expense. But the reason I'm able to save so much of my income is because I'm focused on cutting out the big expenses, not the little expenses. If I cut out that $50 a month in coffee, it wouldn't really save me much in the grand scheme of my budget. So in this video, we're going to be talking about cutting out the big expenses that you have. And we're going to start with number one, the biggest expense, and that's rent. Now, for most people, their biggest expense is going to be rent. And the rule of thumb is that your rent should be 30% of your income. But the reality is people probably have rents that are a lot higher than that. If you live in New York City, it might be 50% of your income. But this place right here, my apartment, this is 16% of my income. And I think it's a decent place. And the reason it's so low is as I start to make more money in life, I choose not to upgrade really quickly. Eventually I'll get a different place, but for right now this suits me well and it allows me to save a lot of money. But regardless of where you live, you'll probably find cheaper rent somewhere else if you're willing to downsize your apartment. And if you're able to save something like $300 a month in downsizing your apartment, that's like saving 6 months worth of coffee, like cutting out 6 months worth of coffee of your budget. And so if you downsize your apartment, you'll be saving a lot more than just by cutting out a cup of coffee. And the second biggest expense that people have in their lives is on their car. Now, I think that cars are traps because if you have an expensive car payment, all you're going to use the car for is just to get to work so you can make money to pay off the car. It's a vicious circle that surprisingly a lot of people get trapped in. My motto on cars is if you can't afford to pay it in cash, you probably shouldn't be getting it. My first car was a 1986 Toyota Camry that I bought for $500, and it served its purpose. It allowed me to go where I wanted to go. And if you're able to cut out car payments and just buy a cheap car in cash, you can save $300 a month in car payment bills. And that's like saving 6 months worth of coffee. And the next biggest expense that people have is on their monthly expenses. If you examine every single monthly bill you have, like insurance, utilities, or your phone bill, you're probably overspending somewhere. For example, most of us have a phone bill. but I guarantee you that majority of people are overpaying for it. In my opinion, phone companies are like gas stations. You just find the cheapest one because they are all selling the exact same thing. I go with the phone company Mint Mobile, and that costs me $15 a month. The average American might spend $50 a month on their cell phone bill, but if you're able to cut out these little tiny things of your utilities or your monthly payments, you'll be saving a lot of money, and that's going to save you a lot more than cutting out a single cup of coffee. And the last expense that people probably overspend their money on is on their groceries. When you go to the grocery store, you have the option to either buy generic brand or name brand. And name brand is usually 20% more expensive on average. So if you just opt for the generic stuff and it's often the exact same ingredients, you'll be saving a lot of money. And that could be hundreds of dollars over the course of a year. And that's going to save you a lot more than a cup of coffee. And the message that I'm trying to send in this video is that when you cut the big expenses, like the ones I mentioned, then the little expenses don't matter. If you're able to cut out $300 from your rent, then you can go ahead and buy the cup of coffee. But if you cut out the $5 cup of coffee and keep your $300 rent, then you're not really saving much. The big expenses are the ones that matter. And if you can cut those things out, then you can enjoy the little expenses. Ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, in the finance community, coffee is often demonized. People hate the idea of spending $5 on a cup of coffee, even if you're sitting back and enjoying your life. As if cutting out that tiny expense, that little $5 expense, is going to fix your financial problems. But the real problem, if you want to grow your money a lot quicker, you cut out the big expenses. You cut out your car payment, you cut out your rent, you lower your grocery expenses, you lower all these expenses, and then you don't have to worry about the cup of coffee, all right? So with that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, and have a good day. Nos vemos, chicos.